The dog was so thin its ribs showed through matted fur, and Zelda Sullivan knelt in the dirt behind her father's barn in Nogales, Arizona territory, tearing pieces from the biscuit she had smuggled from breakfast. It was July of 1884, and the summer heat beat down relentlessly, making the stray's tongue loll as it waited with cautious hope in its eyes. She had been doing this for weeks now, ever since she noticed the small pack of abandoned dogs skulking around the outskirts of their property, too afraid to approach the main house but desperate enough to linger near the scraps, sometimes tossed behind the barn. "Easy now," she whispered, extending her hand slowly. The dog, a mutt with patches of brown and black, crept forward and gently took the offering. Its tail gave a tentative wag and Zelda's heart swelled. She had always been this way, her mother used to say before the fever took her 3 years ago. Too soft for this hard land, too generous with creatures that could not repay her kindness. But Zelda did not see it that way. She saw lives that deserved mercy, bellies that deserved filling, and in a world that often seemed determined to crush anything weak or struggling, she found purpose in offering what little comfort she could. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, ran a modest cattle operation, and while they were not wealthy, they had enough. Enough that sharing a few biscuits or table scraps would not leave them wanting. She had just torn off another piece when she heard the crunch of boots on dry earth behind her. Zelda turned quickly, her hand still extended toward the dog, and found herself looking up at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt, and he wore chaps over worn denim pants. A black hat shaded his face, but she could see dark hair curling at his collar and eyes the color of summer storms watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am sorry," she said, rising quickly and brushing dirt from her skirt. "I did not mean to trespass if this is your property." "It is not mine," the man said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "I work for your father, started this morning. Name's Garrett Young." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect, but his eyes never left hers. "I was checking the fence line back here when I saw you." Zelda felt heat rush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I see. Well, I am Zelda Sullivan. I suppose that makes us acquainted now." Garrett's gaze shifted to the dogs, 3 of them now emerging from behind old crates and barrels, drawn by the promise of food. They kept their distance from him, but they watched Zelda with trust she had earned over patient weeks. "You do this often?" he asked. She lifted her chin, expecting judgment. Most men she knew would call her foolish for wasting good food on strays. "Every day. They are hungry and I have food to spare. It seems a simple enough equation." But Garrett did not laugh or scold. Instead, he studied her face for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like wonder. "You have a kind heart," he said quietly. Then, to her absolute shock, he added, "Marry me." Zelda's mouth fell open. She clutched the remaining biscuit so hard it crumbled in her hand. "I beg your pardon, marry me," Garrett repeated, and though his tone was serious, a small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I have been searching my whole life for a woman with a heart like yours. I did not expect to find her my first morning on a new job, but here you are." "You are insane," Zelda said, but she found herself smiling despite the absurdity of it all. "You do not know the first thing about me. I know you feed hungry dogs even though nobody is watching. I know you speak gently to creatures that cannot speak back. I know you are not afraid to get dirt on your knees for something you believe in." Garrett took a step closer. "That tells me more about your character than 100 Sunday socials ever could." Zelda's heart hammered in her chest. She should walk away. She should laugh this off as the rambling of a man touched by too much sun. but something in the way he looked at her, as though she were precious and rare, made her feet stay rooted to the earth. "You cannot propose marriage to someone you just met," she said, though her voice had lost its certainty. "Maybe not in proper society," Garrett admitted. "But out here, things work different. Life is harder, shorter sometimes. When you find something worth holding on to, you do not waste time with games and pretense." He removed his hat, revealing a face that was handsome in a weathered, honest way. He could not be much older than she was, perhaps 24 or 25 to her 21 years. "I am not asking you to say yes this moment. I am just asking you to consider it, to let me court you properly, to give me a chance to prove I am serious." The dogs had crept closer during their conversation, and one of them, the thin one she had fed first, nudged her hand with its nose. Zelda absently stroked its head, thinking. This was madness. She knew that. But it was also the most exciting thing that had happened to her in years. Since her mother's death, her life had become a series of predictable days, each blending into the next. Cooking, cleaning, helping her father manage the household while he managed the ranch. There had been no suitors, no adventures, no moments that made her pulse race like this. "Where are you from?" she asked, buying herself time to think. "Kansas originally. My family had a farm there, but we lost it during a bad drought 5 years back. I have been moving west ever since, working ranches, learning the cattle trade. I saved enough to buy my own place someday, but that day is still a ways off." Garrett's honesty was refreshing. He did not try to make himself sound more impressive than he was. "I am a hard worker. I do not drink to excess or gamble away my wages. I can promise you that much." "Those are practical qualities," Zelda said carefully. "But what about love? You speak of marriage, but you cannot love someone you just met." "No," Garrett agreed. "But I can recognize the kind of woman I could love, the kind of woman I want to build a life with." He gestured toward the dogs. "Most people out here are just trying to survive. They get hard, closed off. They stop seeing the suffering around them because acknowledging it hurts too much. But you have not let this place make you cold. That is rare. That is worth everything." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not quite say why. Maybe because nobody had ever seen her this way before. To her father, she was just his daughter, the one who stayed when her 2 older brothers went off to seek their fortunes in California. To the townspeople, she was the quiet Sullivan girl who helped at church socials but never drew much attention. But to this stranger, she was someone worthy of admiration, even love. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to know you, time to see if your actions match your pretty words." Garrett's smile widened. "That is all I ask. I will be here every day working for your father. You will have plenty of chances to take my measure." He placed his hat back on his head and gave her a slight bow. "Good day, Miss Sullivan. Thank you for not dismissing me outright. That gives me more hope than you know." He walked away then, back toward the main ranch buildings, leaving Zelda standing among the stray dogs with her mind spinning. She finished distributing the food she had brought, but her thoughts were far from the animals at her feet. Could a person really know, just from one meeting, that they had found the right match? It seemed impossible, the stuff of dime novels rather than real life. And yet, something about Garrett Young had struck a chord deep in her chest, a resonance she could not explain or ignore. That evening, as she prepared supper for herself and her father, Zelda found her hands shaking slightly as she peeled potatoes. Thomas Sullivan was a taciturn man, made more quiet by grief after losing his wife. He sat at the kitchen table reading the territorial newspaper, his weathered face showing every one of his 53 years. "Father," Zelda ventured, "I met the new hand today, Garrett Young." Thomas looked up. "Did you now? What did you make of him?" She hesitated, wondering how much to reveal. He seemed capable, respectful. She could not bring herself to mention the proposal, not yet. It felt too fragile, too strange to expose to scrutiny. How long will he be staying on? Long as he proves useful. We need the help with the fall drive coming up. He came with good references from a ranch up near Prescott. Thomas returned his attention to the paper. Make sure you keep proper distance, daughter. I will not have talk. Of course, Zelda murmured, but inside she felt a flicker of rebellion. She was 21 years old, well past the age when most women married. If she wanted to speak with one of her father's ranch hands, what harm was there in it? Still, she knew the rules of propriety that governed life, even out here on the edge of civilization. A young woman's reputation was fragile as spun glass. Over the following days, Zelda found herself watching for Garrett. She saw him working in the corrals, breaking a new horse with patience rather than force. She saw him riding out with the other hands at dawn and returning covered in dust at sunset. And every morning when she went behind the barn to feed her strays, she found him there, waiting. He did not speak of marriage again. Instead, he asked her questions. About her life, her dreams, what she liked to read, whether she preferred coffee or tea. Simple things, but he listened to her answers as though they mattered. He told her about his own life too, about growing up with 4 sisters who taught him to appreciate a woman's strength, about watching his parents lose everything and vowing he would build something that could not be taken away. You miss them? Zelda asked one morning as they sat on upturned crates, watching the dogs eat. The pack had grown to 5 now, word apparently spreading among strays that this was a safe place for a meal. Every day, Garrett said. My parents died within a year of losing the farm. The heartbreak killed them as sure as any disease. My sisters scattered, married to men across 3 different states. We write when we can, but it is not the same as being together. I understand that kind of loneliness, Zelda said softly. My brothers left 4 years ago. They send money sometimes, but no letters. I think they want to forget this place, forget the hard times we had after Mother died. Garrett reached over and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and Zelda felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. You should not have to be lonely, he said. You should have a family of your own, children who would learn kindness from watching you, a husband who would count himself blessed every morning he woke beside you. Zelda looked at their joined hands, at the way her smaller fingers fit naturally between his. You are courting me, she said, a statement rather than a question. Yes, madam, I am. Is that all right with you? She met his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had not left her thoughts for a moment since they met. Yes, she whispered. I believe it is. From that day, their courtship became the sweetest secret of Zelda's life. They met every morning behind the barn, ostensibly to feed the dogs but really to steal precious minutes together. Garrett brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides. She brought him extra portions of the cookies she baked. They talked about everything and nothing, building a foundation of understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. But they were careful, always careful. Zelda's father could not know, not yet. Thomas Sullivan was protective of his only remaining child, and he would not approve of her forming an attachment to a drifter with no property to his name. So they kept their distance in public, exchanging only the briefest of glances when Garrett came to the house for the noon meal with the other hands. 3 weeks into their courtship, disaster struck. Zelda was in town with her father, purchasing supplies, when she overheard 2 women talking outside the general store. I heard Thomas Sullivan's girl has been carrying on with one of the ranch hands, the first woman said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Meeting him alone behind the barn every morning. Shameful, really. Zelda's blood ran cold. She glanced at her father, but he was inside the store, examining new rope. The second woman clucked her tongue. At her age, you would think she would be grateful for any attention, but to sneak around like that, it speaks poorly of her character. "Excuse me," Zelda said, stepping into view. Both women startled, their faces flushing. "I could not help but overhear you discussing my character. If you have concerns about my behavior, perhaps you should address them to me directly rather than gossiping like schoolgirls." The first woman, Mrs. Henderson, had the grace to look ashamed. But the second, a newcomer to Nogales named Mrs. Price, lifted her chin defiantly. "We are simply concerned for your reputation, Miss Sullivan. A young woman meeting a man alone repeatedly, it creates talk." "Then let people talk," Zelda said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am feeding stray dogs. Garrett Young sometimes assists me." "There is nothing improper about showing Christian charity to God's creatures." "Of course not," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "We meant no offense, but the damage was done." When Thomas emerged from the store and saw his daughter's flushed face and the awkward stance of the two women, he demanded to know what had transpired. Zelda told him, trying to keep her voice steady, watching his expression darken with each word. The ride home was silent and tense. Only when they reached the house did Thomas speak. "Is it true? You have been meeting with the young fellow?" Zelda could not lie, would not lie. "Yes, but father, it is not what you think. We have been feeding the stray dogs together and we talk. That is all. Nothing improper has occurred." "You have been alone with him, unchaperoned, every day for weeks." Thomas's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. "Do you understand what that does to your reputation, to our family's name?" "I understand that small-minded people will think what they wish regardless of the truth," Zelda said, her own temper rising. "I have done nothing wrong. Garrett is a good man and he treats me with respect." "Garrett, is it?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You speak of him with familiarity. Has he made promises to you? Offered marriage?" Zelda hesitated, and that hesitation told her father everything he needed to know. Thomas swore, something he rarely did. "I will dismiss him immediately. I will not have my daughter's name dragged through the mud by some drifter looking to marry up." "No." Zelda stepped in front of her father as he moved toward the door. "Please, father, do not do this. He is a hard worker. You said so yourself, and he has been nothing but honorable toward me." "Honorable men do not compromise young women by meeting them in secret," Thomas said flatly. "He is gone, Zelda. By morning he will be off this property, and you will cease this foolishness with the dogs. Clearly it has led you into trouble." Tears streamed down Zelda's face. "I love him," she said, the words bursting from her before she could stop them. "I know it seems fast, I know it seems foolish, but I love him, father. Please do not send him away." Thomas stopped, his hand on the door. For a long moment he stood there, his back to his daughter. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "Your mother would know what to say right now." She had a way with words, with matters of the heart. "I am just a rancher, Zelda. I do not know how to guide you through this." "Then trust me," Zelda pleaded. "Trust that you and mother raised me well enough to choose wisely. Give Garrett a chance. Let him speak with you properly. Let him court me openly if that is what you require." Thomas turned, and she saw conflict warring in his weathered face. "If I allow this," he said slowly, "and if it ends badly, if he breaks your heart or proves false, you will have only yourself to blame." "I understand," Zelda said quickly. "I accept that risk." "Very well. I will speak with him tonight. We will discuss his intentions. But Zelda, hear me clearly on this. If I find any hint that he is not sincere, any indication that he is trifling with you, I will run him off this ranch so fast his head will spin. Are we understood?" "Yes, father. Thank you." That evening, Zelda paced the parlor while her father summoned Garrett to the house. Through the window, she watched them walk together to the barn, two tall figures silhouetted against the setting sun. They were gone for nearly an hour, and Zelda wore a path in the rug with her anxious steps. What were they discussing? Was Garrett holding his own? Would her father see what she saw in him? When Thomas finally returned alone, his expression was unreadable. Zelda rushed to him. "Well, what did he say?" Thomas sat heavily in his chair. "He asked for permission to court you properly. Said he knows he does not have much to offer now, but he is saving money to buy land. He wants to build a ranch of his own, start a herd. He seemed sincere." "He is sincere," Zelda insisted. "I know he is." "He also said something strange," Thomas continued, his eyes searching his daughter's face. "He said you have the kindest heart he has ever known, that watching you care for those stray dogs showed him the kind of woman you are. That he wants to spend his life being worthy of that kindness." Fresh tears spilled down Zelda's cheeks. "What did you tell him?" "I told him he may court you openly. He may join us for Sunday suppers. He may take you for chaperoned walks into town, but there will be no more secret meetings. No more opportunities for gossip. If he is serious about you, he will do things properly." Zelda threw her arms around her father's neck. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, thank you." Thomas patted her back awkwardly. "Do not thank me yet. We will see what he is made of in the coming months." Talk is easy. It is actions that reveal a man's true character. The next morning, Zelda went to feed the dogs as usual and found Garrett waiting. But this time, he did not hide when he heard her father's footsteps approaching. Instead, he stood straight, met Thomas's eyes, and nodded respectfully. "Morning, sir. I hope you do not mind me helping your daughter with this task. It seems a shame for her to haul all this food alone." Thomas grunted but did not object. He watched for a moment as they fed the animals, then turned and walked back to the house. Zelda let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "That went well," she said. Garrett smiled. "It is a start. He has not shot me yet, so I will count that as progress." Over the following weeks, their courtship took on a new character. Garrett came to Sunday supper, sitting across from Zelda at the table and making polite conversation with her father. They discussed cattle prices and water rights, weather patterns and range management. Zelda saw her father's respect for Garrett growing as the younger man demonstrated his knowledge and work ethic. On Saturday afternoons, with her father's grudging permission, Garrett would drive Zelda into Nogales in the wagon. They walked the dusty streets together, Zelda's hand tucked into the crook of Garrett's arm, and if people stared or whispered, Zelda found she did not care. Let them look. Let them see that she had found someone who valued her for who she was. "Tell me about this ranch you want to build," Zelda said one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the church. September had arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures but no rain yet. "I have been looking at a piece of land about 15 miles north of here," Garrett said, his eyes distant with dreams. "It has a creek that runs year-round, good grass, enough timber for building. The man who owns it now is getting too old to work it. He might be willing to sell for a reasonable price." "How much would you need?" Garrett named a figure that made Zelda's heart sink. It was more money than she had ever seen at one time, though not an impossible sum. "I have about half saved," he continued. "If I keep working for your father another year, maybe two, I will have enough for a down payment. Then I can make payments over time." 2 years. It seemed an eternity. Zelda tried to keep disappointment from her face. "That is wonderful," she said. "You have planned it all so carefully." Garrett turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Zelda, I need you to understand something. I will not ask you to marry me, not properly, until I can offer you a real home. Not a bunkhouse or a rented room, but a place that is ours. You deserve that. You deserve better than poverty and uncertainty." I do not care about those things, Zelda protested. I would live in a tent if it meant being with you. But I care, Garrett said firmly. I watched my mother wither away in poverty after my father lost everything. I saw what that kind of hardship does to a person's spirit. I love you too much to risk that happening to you. It was the first time he had said those words out loud. I love you. Zelda felt her heart expand in her chest. I love you too, she whispered. So much that waiting 2 years feels like torture. Then we will find a way to make it less, Garrett promised. I will talk to other ranchers, see if I can pick up extra work. I will save every penny. We will make this happen, Zelda, I swear it. But fate had other plans. In early October, a drought that had been threatening for months took full hold. The creek that ran through Thomas Sullivan's property slowed to a trickle, then dried up completely. Without water, the cattle began to suffer. Thomas made the difficult decision to drive part of his herd north to the higher country where water still flowed, hoping to keep them alive until the rains returned. I need every able man for this drive, Thomas announced at supper one night. We will be gone at least 3 weeks, maybe longer. Zelda's heart sank. 3 weeks without seeing Garrett seemed unbearable, but she understood the necessity. The cattle were their livelihood. Without them, they would lose everything. The night before the drive began, Garrett asked permission to speak with Zelda alone on the porch. Thomas, perhaps sensing the young man's distress, agreed with a warning. 10 minutes and the door stays open. On the porch, with the stars bright overhead and the door indeed standing open, Garrett pulled something from his pocket. I know I said I would not ask properly until I had the ranch, he began, his voice rough with emotion. But 3 weeks apart, not knowing if you will be here when I return, it is more than I can bear without saying something. He opened his hand to reveal a ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a small turquoise stone, but to Zelda it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. This was my grandmother's, Garrett said. It is the only thing of value I own, the only piece of my family I have left. I want you to wear it. Not as an engagement, not yet, but as a promise. A promise that I will work every day to become the man you deserve. A promise that I will come back to you. A promise that someday, when I have that ranch, I will ask you properly and you will become my wife. Zelda held out her hand and Garrett slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as though it had been made for her. I promise too, she said through tears. I promise to wait for you, to keep feeding our dogs, to trust that you will come back to me. They stood there in the starlight, hands clasped, and Zelda thought her heart might burst with the force of her love for this man. When her father's cough sounded from inside, warning them their time was up, Garrett leaned in quickly and pressed a kiss to her forehead. 3 weeks, he murmured against her skin. Just 3 weeks and I will be back. But 3 weeks turned to 4, then 5. Zelda fed the dogs faithfully every morning, the ring warm on her finger, and watched the horizon for any sign of returning riders. She helped her father's foreman, an older Mexican man named Diego, manage the ranch in Thomas's absence. She tried not to let worry consume her, but with each passing day her anxiety grew. It was Diego who finally brought news. He rode in one evening in early November, his face grave. Señorita Zelda, I have heard from a merchant coming from the north. Your father and the men, they encountered trouble. Rustlers hit them 3 days from the high pasture. There was a fight. Zelda's knees went weak. What kind of fight? Was anyone hurt? The merchant did not know details. He only heard there were injuries. They are bringing the cattle back slowly, taking care of the wounded. They should arrive within a few days. Those few days were agony. Zelda could not eat, could barely sleep. She paced the house and prayed prayers she feared might go unanswered. When she went to feed the dogs, She found herself talking to them, confessing her fears to their patient, understanding eyes. "Please let him be all right," she whispered as the thin dog that had been first to trust her licked her hand. "Please bring him home safe." On the third day, riders appeared on the horizon. Zelda ran from the house, her heart in her throat, counting the figures. Her father was in the lead, looking exhausted but unharmed. Behind him came 4 of the 6 hands who had left, but she did not see Garrett. "Father." She called as Thomas dismounted. "Where is Garrett? Where is he?" Thomas's face was gray with fatigue. "He is alive, but he is hurt. He took a bullet in the shoulder during the fight with the rustlers. We have him in the wagon." Zelda ran past him to where a wagon was pulling up. Garrett lay in the back, his face pale and drawn with pain, his left shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages. But when he saw her, he managed a weak smile. "Hello, sweetheart. I am sorry I am late." "You fool," Zelda sobbed, climbing into the wagon beside him. "You beautiful, brave fool." "Hey now," Garrett said, his right hand reaching for hers. "I promised I would come back, did I not? I just said nothing about being in one piece." They carried him into the house and laid him in the spare bedroom. Thomas sent Diego to fetch the doctor from town while Zelda sat beside Garrett, holding his good hand. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Rustlers ambushed us at night," Garrett said, his voice weak but steady. "They wanted the whole herd. Your father rallied us, organized a defense. We fought them off, but not before they got a few shots in. I was lucky. Poor Sam Cooper took a bullet in the leg that went septic. We buried him 2 days ago." Zelda's grip tightened. Sam had been a quiet young man, barely 20. "This is too high a price," she said. "Cattle are not worth men's lives." "Out here they are," Garrett said. "Without the herd, your father would lose everything. We all knew the risks." The doctor arrived and examined Garrett's wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly, missing bone and major vessels, but infection was a serious concern. He cleaned and rebandaged the injury, left instructions for care, and promised to return in 2 days to check on his patient. For the next week, Zelda barely left Garrett's side. She changed his bandages, spooned broth between his lips when fever made him too weak to feed himself, and sponged his forehead with cool water during the worst of the chills. Thomas looked in occasionally, his expression unreadable, but he said nothing about the hours his daughter spent in the sick room. On the 8th day, the fever broke. Garrett woke clear-eyed and asked for real food. Zelda laughed with relief and rushed to bring him eggs and toast. As he ate, color returning to his face, he looked at her with wonder. "You stayed with me," he said, "through all of it." "Where else would I be?" Zelda said. "I love you. Did you think a little bullet wound would change that?" "Some women might have reconsidered a man who comes home shot," Garrett said wryly. "I am not some women." Zelda leaned forward and kissed him, gently because he was still weak, but with all the love in her heart. "You are stuck with me now, Garrett Young. You had better get used to it." That evening, Thomas asked to speak with both of them. He pulled a chair up to Garrett's bedside, his weathered face serious. "I have been doing some thinking," he said without preamble. "You took a bullet protecting my herd and my investment. You could have run when those rustlers attacked. Some men would have, but you stayed and fought. That speaks to your character." "I was just doing my job, sir," Garrett said. "No," Thomas corrected. "You were doing more than that, and watching my daughter care for you this past week, I have seen something I have been blind to. She loves you, truly loves you, and unless I am mistaken, you feel the same about her." "I do, sir, more than anything in this world." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then I have a proposal for you. I am getting older. This drive reminded me of that. My bones ache, my eyes are not what they were. I need help running this ranch, real help. Not just hired hands, but a partner, someone with a stake in making it succeed." Garrett's eyes widened. "Sir, I am not sure I follow." "I am offering you a partnership," Thomas said bluntly. "Marry my daughter. Help me run this ranch, and when I die, it all becomes yours and hers. I have no sons to leave it to, and my other children have made it clear they want no part of ranch life. You are young, capable, and you love Zelda. It seems like a solution that benefits everyone." Zelda felt tears streaming down her face. "Father, are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Thomas said. He looked at Garrett. "Well, what do you say?" Garrett struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the pull on his healing shoulder. "Mr. Sullivan, I am honored, truly. But I need to be clear about something. I am not agreeing to this for the ranch. I would marry your daughter if she did not have a penny to her name. The ranch is generous beyond measure, but Zelda is the real prize here." Thomas's stern expression cracked into something that might have been a smile. "Spoken like a man in love. Good. Then we have an understanding. I will draw up papers with the lawyer in town next week. In the meantime, you heal up and start planning a wedding." After Thomas left, Zelda sat in stunned silence beside Garrett's bed. Everything had changed so quickly. Just hours ago, they faced years of waiting. Now their future spread before them like a gift. "I cannot believe this is happening," she whispered. "Believe it," Garrett said, pulling her down for another kiss. "We are getting married, sweetheart. You are going to be my wife. When you are well enough to stand through a ceremony," Zelda said, laughing through her tears. "The pastor will not marry us if the groom is flat on his back." "Give me 2 weeks," Garrett said confidently. "I will walk down that aisle even if it kills me." It took 3 weeks before the doctor pronounced Garrett fit for normal activities. His shoulder was still stiff and would likely ache in cold weather for the rest of his life, but the wound had healed cleanly. The day he was cleared, he and Zelda rode into Nogales to speak with the pastor and arrange their wedding. They set the date for the first Saturday in December, giving them time to prepare but not so long that they would go mad with anticipation. Zelda had no mother to help her sew a wedding dress, but several women from church, including Mrs. Henderson, who had gossiped about her weeks ago, volunteered their assistance. As they stitched and fitted, they asked about her romance, and Zelda found herself telling the story. How Garrett had proposed that first day behind the barn, how they had courted in secret, then openly. How he had taken a bullet protecting her father's herd, and how Thomas had offered them a partnership. "It is like something from a storybook," Mrs. Henderson sighed. "You are very fortunate, dear." Zelda thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The lonely years after her mother's death, the simple choice to feed hungry dogs, the stranger who had seen her kindness and recognized something worth treasuring. "Yes," she agreed softly, "I am more fortunate than I ever imagined." The morning of her wedding dawned cold and clear. Zelda woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep, and went to feed her dogs one last time as a single woman. The pack had grown to 7 now, and they greeted her with wagging tails and happy yips. She distributed food and fresh water, then sat among them as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. "This is where it all started," she said to the thin dog who had been first, who now sported a glossy coat thanks to regular meals. "Behind this barn, feeding you. And a man saw me and decided I was worth loving. How strange and wonderful life can be." The dog licked her face, and Zelda laughed. She heard footsteps and turned to find Garrett approaching, looking handsome in a new suit. "You are not supposed to see me before the wedding," she protested. "It is bad luck." "I do not believe in luck," Garrett said, sitting beside her on the ground despite his fine clothes. "I believe in providence. I believe God put me exactly where I needed to be that July morning so I could see you and know I had found my future." "You were so bold," Zelda said, smiling at the memory. "Proposing marriage to a stranger." "You were so beautiful," Garrett countered. "Kneeling in the dirt, offering kindness to creatures everyone else had abandoned. How could I not fall in love instantly?" They sat together among the dogs as the sun rose higher, hand in hand, until Diego appeared to remind them that the ceremony was in 2 hours and they both needed to prepare. Zelda kissed Garrett once more, then hurried to the house to dress. The wedding took place in the small church in Nogales, with what seemed like the entire town crammed into the pews. Zelda wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, her dark hair pinned up with flowers. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw only Garrett, waiting at the altar with love shining in his storm-gray eyes. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and prayers. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and invited Garrett to kiss his bride, Zelda felt like her heart might burst from sheer joy. This was real. This was happening. She was married to the man she loved, the man who had seen the best in her from their very first meeting. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables of food set up in the barn Thomas had cleared for the occasion. Musicians played fiddles and guitars while people danced and celebrated. Zelda danced with her new husband, with her father, with Diego and the other ranch hands. She accepted congratulations and best wishes from neighbors and friends. But her favorite moment came near sunset, when she and Garrett slipped away from the party to check on the dogs. They found the pack resting peacefully behind the barn, bellies full from scraps the cook had set aside. "They look happy," Garrett observed, his arm around Zelda's waist. "They are loved and fed and safe," Zelda said. "What more could any creature want?" She looked up at her husband. "What more could I want? I have everything right here." "Not quite everything," Garrett said, his expression turning serious. "There is one more thing I want to give you." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "I spoke with the man who owns that land I told you about, the piece north of here. He agreed to hold it for us. Your father is loaning me the down payment as a wedding gift. We can start building our own place come spring if you want. It can be our project, yours and mine together." Zelda took the paper with shaking hands, seeing the property deed inside. "Our own ranch," she breathed. "Garrett, this is too much." "It is not too much. It is exactly what I promised you that first day, a home, a future, a life together." He cupped her face gently. "I keep my promises, Zelda Young." Zelda Young. Her new name sounded strange and wonderful on his lips. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. "Then I promise you something in return," she said when they broke apart. "I promise to be the best wife, the best partner, the best friend you could ask for. I promise to love you every single day through whatever challenges come. I promise to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Garrett said, "just by existing, just by being exactly who you are." They returned to their reception hand in hand, and the celebration continued into the night. When it finally ended and the last guest departed, Zelda and Garrett climbed the stairs to the room that had been prepared for them. It was the same room where Zelda had nursed Garrett through his injury, but it had been transformed with fresh linens and flowers, made into a proper bridal chamber. That night, as her husband held her close and whispered words of love against her skin, Zelda reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led her here. All because she chose to feed hungry dogs. All because a stranger saw her kindness and recognized its value. All because they were both brave enough to trust in something that made no logical sense, but felt absolutely right. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Zelda settled into her role as Garrett's wife and Thomas's daughter-in-law, managing the household and learning more about ranch operations. Garrett recovered fully from his injury, and threw himself into working alongside Thomas, learning every aspect of running the property. In the evenings, they pored over plans for their future ranch, sketching layouts for buildings, and discussing what kind of cattle they would raise. The dogs remained a constant in their lives. Zelda fed them faithfully, and Garrett built them a proper shelter behind the barn so they would be protected from winter cold. Word spread that the Sullivan Ranch was a haven for strays, and more dogs appeared. Soon they had a pack of nearly a dozen, which Garrett jokingly called their first children. In February, Zelda realized she might be expecting a real child. She waited another month to be certain before telling Garrett, wanting to be absolutely sure before raising his hopes. When she finally shared the news on a cool March evening, Garrett lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "In late September or early October, the doctor thinks," Zelda said, her own happiness bubbling over. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased. Zelda, I am the happiest man alive." Garrett set her down gently, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "A son or daughter, someone to inherit everything we are building, someone to teach about kindness and hard work and loving the land." "What if it is a son and he wants to be a lawyer?" Zelda teased. "What if it is a daughter and she wants to run away to San Francisco?" "Then we will support them," Garrett said seriously. "We will love them no matter what path they choose. That is what parents do." Thomas was equally delighted by the news of a grandchild on the way. "Your mother would be so happy," he told Zelda, his eyes misty. "She always wanted grandchildren, always talked about teaching them to bake and telling them stories." "Tell those stories to our baby," Zelda said, taking her father's weathered hand. "Keep Mother's memory alive through the next generation." As spring arrived and Zelda's pregnancy became visible, work began on the new ranch. The land Garrett had purchased was everything he had promised, beautiful and fertile with good water and grass. They decided to call it the Young Ranch, simple but fitting. Every weekend, weather permitting, Zelda and Garrett rode out to watch the progress as hired workers erected a house and barn. "It needs to be finished before the baby comes," Garrett fretted one Sunday in June as they surveyed the half-built house. "I want you and the baby settled and comfortable." "We have 3 months," Zelda soothed. "That is plenty of time. And if it is not quite finished, we can stay at Father's place a bit longer. He will not mind." But Garrett pushed the workers hard and himself harder. By August, the house stood complete, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows to let in light. The barn was functional if not fancy, with space for horses and equipment. They moved their belongings in late August, sleeping for the first time under their own roof. "This is ours," Zelda said, looking around the bedroom with its simple furniture and wedding gift quilts. "Everything in this house, this ranch, this life we are building, it is ours, Garrett." "Ours," he agreed, pulling her close. "Built on love and hard work and a little bit of providence." Their son arrived on a cool October morning after a labor that Zelda later described as long but manageable. Garrett paced outside the bedroom while the midwife and Mrs. Henderson attended to his wife, nearly wearing a hole in the new floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst through the door despite Mrs. Henderson's protests. Zelda lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Garrett approached on trembling legs and looked down at the red, wrinkled little face. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." "We need to name him," Zelda said. "I was thinking about your father. What was his name?" "George," Garrett said. "George William Young." "Then our son will be George as well," Zelda decided. "George Thomas Young after both his grandfathers." They brought little George to meet Thomas the following week, when Zelda was strong enough to make the short trip. The older man held his grandson with shaking hands, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered cheeks. "He has your eyes, Zelda," he said. "Your mother's eyes, blue as summer sky." "And Garrett's stubborn chin," Zelda added, laughing. "We are in trouble when he gets older." Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. George proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and an apparently endless appetite. Zelda had never known it was possible to love someone so completely while also being so desperately tired. But through it all, Garrett was there, sharing the burden. He walked the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night. He changed diapers without complaint. He marveled at every tiny milestone, every smile and coo. "I never knew," he said one night as they finally collapsed into bed after getting George to sleep. "I never knew how much you could love someone so small." "Our hearts just keep expanding," Zelda said, snuggling against her husband's chest. "There is always room for more love." The dogs, of course, adored the new baby. When Zelda brought George outside, they would gather around protectively, as though standing guard over one of their own. Garrett built a fence to keep them from getting too close, but Zelda loved seeing their devoted faces watching over her son. As George grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Garrett proved to have excellent instincts for cattle ranching, and their herd grew steadily. Thomas came to visit often, teaching his grandson to ride before the boy was barely old enough to walk. The partnership between the three ranches, Thomas's original property, what was now Zelda and Garrett's ranch, and the shared grazing land, worked smoothly. When George was 2, Zelda discovered she was expecting again. This time she told Garrett immediately, too excited to wait. "Another baby," she said, beaming. "Our family is growing." "Our family is perfect," Garrett said, kissing her soundly. "Whether we have one child or a dozen, it is perfect because it is ours." Their daughter arrived the following spring, a tiny thing with dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Grace Ellen, after both Zelda's mother Ellen and the concept that Zelda insisted had brought them together. "It was Grace," she told Garrett as they introduced Grace to her adoring big brother. "Pure grace that you walked behind that barn the exact moment I was there. Pure grace that you saw me for who I truly was." "Then Grace is the perfect name," Garrett agreed. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch expanded. More children arrived, 2 more sons they named Henry and James. The pack of dogs eventually stabilized at around 15, with new strays occasionally arriving while older ones passed peacefully away. George grew into a serious boy who loved the cattle and already talked about running the ranch someday. Grace was wild and fearless, equally comfortable in the barn or helping her mother in the kitchen. The younger boys were still finding themselves, but they brought joy and chaos in equal measure. Through it all, through the hard years when drought threatened and the good years when everything seemed to go right, Zelda and Garrett's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming richer and more complex as they built a life together. They still stole moments alone when they could, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other and marveled at their good fortune. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Zelda with a new ring, a beautiful band with diamonds that sparkled in the sunlight. "To replace the simple one I gave you," he said, as he slipped it on her finger alongside the original turquoise ring she still wore. "I never wanted to replace it," Zelda protested, though she admired the new ring's beauty. "That ring represents everything we built together." "Then wear them both," Garrett suggested. "The old alongside the new, our past and our future together on your hand." Zelda kissed him, not caring that their children were watching and giggling. "You are still the same man who proposed marriage to a stranger," she said fondly. "Still romantic, still bold. And you are still the woman who fed hungry dogs when nobody was watching," Garrett replied. "Still kind, still generous, still the best person I have ever known." Thomas Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep when George was 12, surrounded by his family and full of years. They buried him next to his wife Ellen in the Nogales cemetery, and Zelda cried for the father who had given her so much. Not just an inheritance, but the freedom to choose her own path, to marry for love rather than duty. After the funeral, as the family gathered back at the original Sullivan Ranch, Garrett pulled Zelda aside. "We should move here," he said quietly. "This house is bigger, the land more established. We can run both properties from here, and it keeps everything in the family." Zelda looked around the house she had grown up in, seeing her mother's touches still everywhere despite the years. "Are you certain? Our ranch was your dream." "You are my dream," Garrett corrected. "You and our children and the life we have built together. A house is just walls and a roof. Home is wherever you are." So they moved back to the Sullivan Ranch, bringing their dogs and children and all their belongings. The house that had once seemed quiet and lonely filled with noise and laughter. George took over his grandfather's old room and declared he would be a cattle rancher just like his grandfather and father. Grace claimed a room with a view of the barn where the dogs lived. The younger boys shared a room and spent their days getting into mischief. Years continued to pass. The children grew. George proved to be an exceptional rancher, taking on more responsibility as Garrett's hair turned gray. Grace surprised everyone by developing a talent for breeding and training horses, turning part of the ranch into a successful horse operation. Henry became interested in the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to improve their profits. James, the youngest, showed signs of wanting to study law, and though this meant he might eventually leave the ranch, Garrett and Zelda supported his dreams. Through it all, Zelda continued to feed the dogs. Even as her hair silvered and her joints grew stiff, she made the walk behind the barn every morning with food and fresh water. The dogs changed over the years, new strays replacing those who passed, but there were always dogs. Always hungry mouths to feed, always tails to wag at her approach. "You have fed probably hundreds of dogs over the years," Garrett observed one morning when they were both in their 50s. He had joined her behind the barn, something he still did regularly even after all this time. "Thousands of meals distributed to creatures who could never repay you." "They repay me every day," Zelda said, scratching behind the ears of an old hound who had shown up lame and half-starved 2 years ago and now lived like a king. "They remind me that kindness matters. That caring for the vulnerable is never wasted effort." Garrett put his arm around her waist, and they stood together watching the dogs eat. "Do you remember the first time we stood here together?" he asked. "I looked at you kneeling in the dirt and knew instantly you were meant to be mine." "I remember thinking you were insane," Zelda said with a laugh. "Who proposes marriage to a complete stranger?" "A man who knows what he wants when he sees it," Garrett replied. "A man who is not willing to let the best thing in his life slip away because he was too timid to speak up." "It was the boldest, most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me," Zelda admitted. "I fell in love with you in that moment, even though I did not want to admit it." They stood in comfortable silence, years of partnership and love between them, until Garrett spoke again. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Zelda agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a lonely girl feeding strays behind her father's barn." "Should we tell them?" Garrett asked, and Zelda knew he meant their children. "About how we really began, the whole story." Zelda considered. Their children knew the basic tale that their parents had met when Zelda was feeding dogs and their father had been instantly smitten. But they did not know about the proposal that first day, the weeks of secret courtship, the fight with rustlers that nearly cost Garrett his life. They did not know all the twists and turns that had led to the life they all enjoyed now. Yes, she decided, let us tell them. Let them understand that the best things in life are worth fighting for, that love is worth risking everything. That kindness creates ripples that spread farther than we can ever imagine. That evening, with all 4 children and their families gathered around the dinner table, Zelda and Garrett told the whole story. They talked about that July morning in 1884 when a stranger walked behind a barn and saw a young woman feeding stray dogs. They described the instant connection, the bold proposal, the careful courtship. They recounted the cattle drive and the rustlers, the injury and the recovery. They explained how Thomas had offered them a partnership, how they had built their ranch from nothing into something substantial. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, clearly fascinated by this glimpse into their grandparents' past. George, now a man of 30 with a wife and children of his own, shook his head in wonder. "You proposed the first day you met?" he asked his father. "What made you so certain?" Garrett looked at Zelda, his eyes still holding the same love they had held that long-ago morning. "I cannot explain it rationally," he admitted. "I just knew. Looking at your mother, seeing her kindness in action, something in my soul recognized her. I could have walked away, courted her slowly and properly from the start. But I was terrified that if I did not speak immediately I might lose my chance, so I took the risk." "And you?" Grace asked her mother. "Were you not frightened, angry that a stranger would be so presumptuous?" "I was shocked," Zelda said honestly, "but I was also intrigued. Your father saw the best in me when I was just doing what felt right. He valued my kindness when most people would have called it foolishness. How could I not give him a chance?" The stories continued late into the night. Tales of building the ranch and raising children, of droughts survived and successes celebrated. When the gathering finally broke up, and the younger families departed for their own homes, Zelda and Garrett sat on the porch in the gathering darkness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not walked behind the barn that morning?" Zelda asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "If you had gone a different direction, checked a different fence line?" "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "But then I remember that I do not believe in random chance. I think we were meant to find each other. Maybe not that exact day, that exact moment, but somehow. The universe wanted us together. Then I am grateful to the universe," Zelda said softly, "and to the stray dogs that led me to that barn. And to whatever impulse made me show them kindness even when nobody was watching." "Your kindness changed my life," Garrett said, kissing the top of her head. "It gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just existing. Everything good in my world started the moment I saw you kneeling in that dirt." They sat together until the stars came out, until the chill of the evening sent them inside to the warmth of their home. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing portraits of children and grandchildren, Zelda reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From lonely girl to beloved wife and mother. From feeding strays in secret to running a successful ranch with the love of her life. "No regrets?" Garrett asked as they prepared for bed, a question he had asked her countless times over the years. "Not a single one," Zelda replied, the same answer she always gave. "You?" "Only that I did not find you sooner," Garrett said, pulling her into his arms, "that we did not have even more years together." "Then we will make the most of the years we have left," Zelda said firmly. "We will love our family, run our ranch, and continue to show kindness wherever we can. We will live so fully that when our time comes, we will have no reason to wish for more." "Except maybe one more day," Garrett said softly. "I will always wish for one more day with you." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, bodies that knew each other's rhythms and responses, hearts that beat in synchrony. Afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked until sleep claimed them, discussing plans for the ranch and hopes for their grandchildren, remembering stories from their past and dreaming about the future. The years continued their steady march. Garrett and Zelda grew older but remained active, still involved in running the ranch even as George took on more of the daily responsibilities. More grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and joy during visits. The pack of dogs remained constant, with Zelda still making her morning trips to feed them, though Garrett now insisted on accompanying her to make sure she did not slip or fall. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the house and yard. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. George made a toast to his parents, speaking of their devotion to each other and the example they set. "Most of us dream of finding love like theirs," he said, raising his glass. "The kind that starts with a moment of recognition and grows deeper with every passing year. The kind that weathers every storm and celebrates every joy. The kind that builds something lasting, not just for two people but for generations. To my parents, who showed us all what love really means." Everyone drank, and Zelda felt tears streaming down her face. She looked around at all these lives, all these people who existed because she had chosen to feed stray dogs behind a barn 40 years ago. Because Garrett had been bold enough to speak his heart immediately rather than letting the moment pass. Because they had both been brave enough to trust in something that defied logic, but felt absolutely right. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Zelda and Garrett returned to the barn one last time. The current pack of dogs greeted them with wagging tails and happy sounds. They sat on the same crates where they had sat during their courtship, holding hands and remembering. 40 years, Zelda marveled. "It seems like both forever and no time at all." "The best 40 years of my life," Garrett said. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt, it all led us here, to this life we built together. "I love you," Zelda said simply. "I have loved you from that first day when you looked at me like I was something precious. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Garrett replied. "My kind-hearted, beautiful wife. The woman who saw stray dogs and chose compassion. The woman who took a chance on a dusty cowboy with more dreams than money. The woman who made all my dreams come true just by being exactly who you are." They sat together under the stars, surrounded by the descendants of the dogs Zelda had first fed, until the night grew cold and they made their way back to the house. Life would continue its march. There would be more grandchildren, more seasons, more joys and sorrows to navigate. But they would face it all together, as they always had, bound by love and commitment, and the shared history of a life well lived. Garrett passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Zelda holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, as did their entire family, but she did not crumble. She had their children and grandchildren, their ranch and their legacy. She had 44 years of memories to sustain her. And she had the knowledge that they had loved each other completely, that nothing had been left unsaid or undone. She continued to feed the dogs every morning, now with her great-grandchildren sometimes accompanying her. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the day he proposed marriage to a woman he had just met, because he saw her being kind to strays. The children listened with wonder, and Zelda saw the lesson taking root. Kindness matters. Love is real. Bold actions can change everything. Zelda lived to be 84, active and sharp until nearly the end. When she finally joined Garrett in the Nogales cemetery, with the entire town turning out for her funeral, the pastor spoke of a life defined by compassion and love. He mentioned the hundreds of dogs she had fed over the decades, the family she had raised, the ranch she had helped build. But mostly, he spoke of the love story that had started behind a barn and lasted a lifetime. George and his siblings continued to run the ranch, honoring their parents' legacy. The tradition of feeding stray dogs continued, passed down through generations. And sometimes, when a new hand would join the operation and ask about all the dogs, the family would smile and tell the story. The story of a woman with a kind heart and a cowboy brave enough to speak his mind. The story of how a single moment of recognition can change everything. The story of love that started with feeding stray dogs and grew into something that touched countless lives across multiple generations. The young ranch prospered for over a century, always with dogs roaming the property, always with the values of kindness and hard work at its core. And though Zelda and Garrett were long gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the land and the family they had created. A testament to the power of seeing goodness in others, of being brave enough to speak your heart, and of choosing love even when it defies all logic and convention. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The proposal behind the barn, the rushed courtship, the cattle drive and the injury, the partnership offer, the wedding and the children and the years of building something beautiful together. It was all there, preserved in letters and photos, and the stories passed down, a reminder that the greatest adventures often start with the smallest acts of kindness, and the courage to recognize love when it appears.